and welcome to this roundtable discussion titled Managing Complexity for Manufacturing Startups Today and Tomorrow. My name is Arvind Krishnan, and I'm a senior industry analyst at Lifecycle Insights, and I will be your host today. I would like to extend a warm welcome to our guests, Kevin O'Donovan, a technology evangelist, and Peter Terwilliger from Dassault Systems. Kevin and Peter, welcome to this roundtable discussion.
Thank you, Arvind.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
When we were planning this roundtable just a few weeks back, the world, especially for startups, was a very different place. But starting with the crisis at Silicon Valley Bank, the investment scenario for startups is quite complicated today, I must say. Everyone in this field agrees that the days of easy money for startups have gone. Rising interest rates worldwide pose a completely different challenge for startup leaders, as investors now demand way more return than they would have liked at least a year back. Now, I would like to ask our panelists to join this discussion with this as the context. I'll start with you, Kevin. What does the banking crisis mean to you today? And how must startup leaders prepare their organization, knowing what we know right now?
Well, it's a tougher situation. I suppose in my career when I was with Intel or in what I do now, working with big and small companies, let's face it, getting funding has always been challenging for companies, right? Now, granted, we talk that easy money has kind of gone away, or easier money, but it's always been challenging. So always VCs were looking for, well, how do I reduce the risk, or any type of investors? And if I may, it's not just Silicon Valley Bank, and there's been some tragic consequences and the fallout from that, but it's not just the SVB Bank and VCs. We see it right across the banking sector, right across the globe, in terms of a lot of nervousness in terms of banks having invested in government bonds, which you would think would have been safe, and. So there's a lot of people that are very nervous right now. So it is getting much harder in the past couple of weeks if you're out there looking for a new round of investment. So I suppose it's always been hard. Now it is harder. And again, a VC or an investor will be looking for, well, whoever I'm going to invest in, how do I reduce the risk of investing in this company? So they're going to start asking probably more tougher questions in terms of, well, how are you going to deal with this? We live in a world where everybody has to be a lot more resilient. You don't know what's going to happen. So if something happens in your supply chain or your design or your customer changes, or what tools are you using, and. So I think there's going to be a lot more due diligence, if you like, from investors asking a startup in terms of, okay, well, what exactly is your competitive advantage outside of having a viable product, but how are you structured, and how are you going to get all this stuff done and deal with the uncertainty? So I think that's going to become more of a critical factor.
Thank you, Kevin. It's always been hard, but it has become harder. That's the message. It rings in my ear. So over to you, Peter. So that really means that as a manufacturing startup leader, I need to be ahead of my peers in this race, right? Can you talk about it? How can you prepare to get ahead of others as a leader?
That's exactly right, Arvind. Thank you. Yeah, it's hard. The age of easy money is passing, and easy is in quotes, right? It's never been super easy, but it's now at 10% interest rates, 11%, 12, 15, who knows where it's going, right? So let's imagine for a minute that I'm a founder at a startup. Let's say I found and attracted an investor, something that's hard to do for all the reasons we just talked about, right? I have a big challenge in front of me. I need to convince that investor that I'm worthy of their investment, that the risk that they're going to take on my company is worth it and in their intention, their intent of their business, that I have what it takes not only to return their investment, but to be the next big thing. And that I can do it before the competitors enter that marketplace and take away my market share, right? Or at least compete for my market share. So I need to show them a couple of things. I need to show them that I have the management chops to run that business. I need to show them that I have a great product with a large potential market. And I need to show them that I have the right tech to collaborate, design, and bring my product to market with quality and speed. That is what makes me stand out to that investor. If I can do that, if I can convince them of those things, I am well on my way to convince them that they need to give me my unfair share of their money.
Very well said, Peter. Very well said. Now that we have addressed the elephant in the room, which is the changing financial scenario after the collapse of SVB and the other things our panelists talked about, right? Let us get back to what Peter just said. How to get my product first to market with exceptional quality, right? I mean, that's the challenge, which is, I would say, the technological challenge that is here, right? So on this front, Lifecycle Insights actually published an ebook, which you will see on the screen. These are basic solutions for manufacturing startups. Now, we will discuss a couple of things that has been highlighted in this ebook, right? When you talk about these traditional engineering or mechanical products, they used to be at least mechanical a decade or two ago. They've now transitioned or radically changed to become complex, smart, and connected products, right? As a result, there's a need for diverse engineering teams. We're talking about mechanical, electrical, electronic, software, systems, and also various business teams. We're talking about the marketing teams, the sales teams, the teams that interface with the investors and so on. They need to work together, right? These are the two things that seem very attractive in terms of the offering for a successful startup. So let me start with you, Kevin. What kind of product/organizational complexities, if I may say, do startups face today? And how can they address these?
Again, if you kind of go back since the very first startup, there's always been product and organizational complexities. Now, I suppose if I may, it depends on the product you're bringing to market, right? If you have a small widget, it's a product, it's got a certain whatever, supply chain, life cycle, whatever. Or if you're off designing the next generation of hydrogen-powered aircraft, right? A bit more complex and a bit more complexity involved in everything there. But Peter mentioned earlier is that, like, you come back to the fundamentals. Well, if I'm a startup, you hopefully have a very compelling value proposition. You have a product, you have a service, you're bringing something that people go, yeah, I could see where you could buy that. You'd be asked every startup would have had pitch deck, right? Here's the market opportunity, here's how we're going to deliver it, here's the potential share of market we can capture, blah, blah, here's how we think, and here's the team, and trust us, and please give us a bigger share of your money than you should. And that's not changed. But I do think what I've seen change over the past, and probably COVID kicked it off, and now it's kind of kicked in a bit more with the whole banking situation we're in, is that people are starting to ask a bit more fundamental questions and go, okay, so that's how you're doing it. Okay, so let's dive into how exactly are you designing this thing? Who's designing it? Where are they? What tools are you using? And the reason for that is that, look, I've worked with some brilliant startups in the past, and I'll be honest, they were running it on Post-it notes and Excel spreadsheets, and it worked, right? But you get into today's world and it's remote, and you mentioned, Arvind, and in your ebook, you call out like the complexity of the product. You could have diverse different teams. There's chemical engineers, mechanical engineers. It could be whatever, right? Depends on what you're doing. So how do you coordinate all these people? And I'll be honest, sticky tapes or sticky notes and Excel sheets don't cut it anymore. You have asynchronous communication. So how does that happen? What happens if someone leaves? How fast can you bring them on board? Your supply chain. Are you relying on supply chain? And yeah, it works. It's perfect. But we've seen with supply chains in the past, whatever, couple of years, the things change. So if it changed, how fast can you react? So, and it's not that you have to have the perfect answer. I don't think anyone has a perfect answer. But you're now going to have to be able to shade that, look, I guarantee you there's going to be changes we didn't expect in the product, in the design, what the customer wants, different customer. How do we integrate with that customer's tools? How do we collaborate with them? You know, Peter, you mentioned is that, you got to have a great product, you got to use the right tech, and you got to be able to bring it to market at the right time, at the right scale, at the right speed. So I'll start asking all the nasty questions to somebody going, well, how are you going to react to something's bad's going to happen? Someone's going to leave, different customer, different supply chain issue, different geopolitics, whatever. How do you react? And depending on how they answer that, that's how I then start to do I trust them to give them more money than I should? Because they have a plan. It's not that they know all the answers, but you got to have a plan. And a lot of that is down to tools and technology. It's not just we're nice people anymore, right?
Interesting, Kevin. Peter, I'm sure you're seeing a lot of excellent startups who are trying to design the next hydrogen-powered airplane or cars or what, public transportation, as Kevin said. What are you seeing with your startups customers today regarding complexity? How are they reacting, and where is the problem? How is it manifesting in their day-to-day operations?
Well, indeed we do, Arvind. One of the things that really stands out over and over and over again is what I see is just the propensity to put themselves, without even knowing it, at a disadvantage when it comes to technology, right? I work for a technology company. I see this all the time, right? They tend to use what they know. I mean, they may have the most amazing high-tech idea, but they tend to use what they know or what they have or where they can get it at a bargain price, right? Because everybody's cost conscious and in trying to do the right thing. Maybe they have access to some kind of CAD application that they learned back in college or, some previous company. Perhaps they're using email to email attachments to each other back and forth and send data. Maybe every Friday they get together and pour over someone's spreadsheet that Kevin mentioned earlier that, hopefully everybody got every, item on the punch list, but who knows, maybe something was missed. And worse still, one of the worst things we see, shared drives with naming conventions that are astounding in their complexity, trying to figure out when a revision comes out and what drawing or what file or this, that, and the other thing. It's a mess, right? We see that all the time. These point solutions are no bargain. They don't talk to each other. They don't enable teamwork. They don't enable collaboration. They cause confusion all over the place as to what revision am I using. They make me spend, worse still, as that startup guy, they're making me spend a ton of time converting my data from one application to another. I mean, that's just overhead time, right? I got to translate it from my modeling application to my simulation application, and I got to get it in Excel, and oh my gosh, right? There's no guarantee that anyone's on the same page here. And that's a huge problem. We've all been to that fab shop out back. Next time you're at one of these things, go take a look at that rusted metal. That rusted metal out there is because people weren't on the same page. That's stuff that got rejected. Maybe somebody used the wrong revision. Maybe somebody forgot to include a change, or plain just forgot that there was some kind of agreement to make a last minute modification that got lost in the telephone call. This is the kind of complexity that can kill you as a startup. It makes you inefficient, prone to mistakes, and costs all kinds of money to get anything done. Flat out, if I was Kevin, who's posing as our venture capitalist earlier in this call, he's looking into us, it makes me a lot less desirable to him. And this is the complexity that we're aiming when we talk about the 3D Experience platform for startups on the cloud.
Thank you, Peter. It just looks like having a single source of truth is the holy grail here. Huh? That looks. It's certainly how do I manage tons of revisions that came out? If only I can have everyone in the ecosystem can have the right file at the right time with minimal time to access that data. Wow, it sounds easy while talking, right? I mean, I guess that's where the real problem. So let's shift gears now and hit what we need to. The need for a robust platform that gives you everything that Kevin and Peter just talked about, right? It has to connect various stakeholders. It must support the most sophisticated engineering tools. Simulation comes to my mind, PLM, supply chain management, quality management, whatever. I mean, but there are others, right? We need to have, as startup leaders, a very robust tool that doesn't work just today, but that has to work along your life cycle, right? So Kevin, why don't we start with you, right? What do startup leaders seek in a product development solution? I think we are repeating these questions here, but if you can be a little bit specific, are there some critical features that are necessary?
Well, you yourself and Peter have outlined many of them, right? And look, we've all been to school and college, and we've sat through all the training courses, and there's plenty of books out there in terms of the methodologies and whatever. So we all go, yeah, I need all that. But to Peter's point earlier, is about putting it into practice. And many times in a startup, it's like, look, let's face it, I've got a great idea. I got a bunch of people who are, I've got to get this out the door. And you know, whether it's sticky notes and Excel sheets all the way up to the latest and greatest CAD system in the sky and lots of other things, it's like, we'll just get it done. And they often do. But the feature is that in the world we live in today, and things are getting a bit more complex, and there's different systems and different tools and whatever. And whether you come, you know, you said the one version of the truth, it's that transparency that it's not that I have to be on top of every change and approve everything. But if I want to go back and look at what did change or what didn't change, I can actually go back and kind of replay it, if you like, in terms of to Peter's point. It's like, well, what was the name of the file that we posted somewhere 6 months ago that someone might have deleted and whatever, or got lost in an email. So it's kind of going back, and I call it playing devil's advocate. So someone says, oh, well, we're not, trust us, we're really good. And I said, like, hey, look, I trust you, but let me just dig on this a bit. So what happens when customer X comes back and says, no, we need this thing a bit bigger or wider or something or whatever? How do you track that so that, to Peter's point, someone doesn't drop the ball? And to be honest, you get an answer, right? And you just want to see how credible. Does it pass the red face test? And if they say that, oh, well, our Excel spreadsheet is the best spreadsheet in the world, it might well be, but I'm kind of going, okay. Whereas if they're using, let's say, proven tools and what the big guys use and whatever, it's like, Arvind, you're back to your point, is that, well, you don't know who your next customer might be, who you're going to connect to. And many startups will have the skills in terms of, oh, we'll just write a connector for that. It's API, it will be grand. And I'm sure they could, but like, all these things take time. And then there's version control of that, and you're writing software, and is that your core competency and whatever? So it's kind of back. Everyone knows the theory, but how do you put it into practice in the least amount of friction with the company that you're in? And again, it's back to what product are you doing, who you're working with, what industry, whatever. So but you got to step back a small bit at times and start playing out. We might go slower for the next month or so while we kind of get some stuff lined up, but that will allow us to accelerate at a constant pace. And it's not that we're going to accelerate into a brick wall where our work processes just collapse. Now, that's a bit theoretical, but it's back to the, do I pass the red face test when someone says, well, how are you going to react to these changes? How are you going to react to a new customer asking you to connect to a new system? How do you do transparency? How can you give me a warm feeling that you know what's going on? And then do I trust you? That's what you have to pass right now.
Excellent, Kevin. You know, you mentioned, how can I get the good processes that everybody knows out there into practice, right? I mean, that's the critical thing. So Peter, coming back to you, can you talk to us about the 3D Experience platform now and tell us how people can get those best practices out there internalize and get it to practice? Yeah. And why is it vital for manufacturing startups?
Absolutely. And I love how Kevin was talking about that red face test and, do I trust you? And that's what we're aiming to go here. So I'm going to talk about three things. First, let's talk about the data, right? There's an old proverb that talks about the data is the data, which is the data. Nobody remembers who said it, doesn't really matter who says it, but it's an ancient proverb that we thought about when we set out to create the 3D Experience platform. Right, our 3D Experience platform is data-driven. It's an approach that integrates traditional files and data and puts it all in the same place and stores it in a database that's streamed directly from the cloud. And that's key because that makes it accessible to anyone. So when you think about this, It's all the same data. It's just how you look at it. If you look at the data using a 3D modeling lens, it appears as a 3D model ready for you to make the work that you do as you model your 3D and bring your product through design. If you look at it through a bill of materials lens, it shows up as a bill of material ready for you to start thinking about how you're going to purchase it, what your sourcing is going to be, what your timelines are, your long lead time items, your short lead time items. Maybe you look at it through a lens of a project manager, and that project manager, it appears as a schedule. Hey, we've got some various pieces that have to go together in a sequence. We have a design phase, we have a review phase, we have a purchasing phase, all that kind of stuff. It's how you look at the data. And the point is that gets us back to what we were talking about just a minute ago, that single version of the truth. When we make a change in any one of these lenses, that data propagates across all the users, across all the data, and it therefore is always up to date, right? We're not worried about revisions. Well, we are worried about revisions, but we're not worried about, did I get the right revision in the email? And so that I can now start manufacturing something. But that data is always up to date. Second, the 3D Experience platform is designed to be infinitely scalable. And we do that by being on the cloud. So the cloud gives us the ability to put this technology, this enterprise level software in your hands as the smallest startup. It's easy to install and deploy. It comes as a link through your browser. It's always up to date because we are doing the database administration. We are doing the software deployment on our servers. This is software as a service. It's delivered to you on your desktop. We've got it taken care of. We've got data centers across the world. It's available 24/7 for you everywhere across the world. Again, we mentioned no IT management, and that ultimately is about low cost of ownership, and you're up and running very quick. There are lots of good things to think about having enterprise level software like this on the cloud where you have that one source of truth, but I highlighted just one in this conversation. Get to market faster. You want to be able to instill in Kevin that trust that he's looking for, that you're able to do what you need to do and get your product to market and not waste their money and waste their time. So let's go to the third thing that I want to mention today. And this is a concept you might not have thought about. A lot of startups that I see are assembled from various different people. We have experienced people on one hand. We have new people coming out of college, engineers and everything else. At the end of the day, we all need to participate in this startup venture. So on the left-hand side of the slide, we have 3D creators. Back when I was in practice, everybody had to learn my CAD package so that I could share my files with them and they could see what I was doing. Even though this CAD package had all the complexity that was necessary to do what it needed to do, these people were just looking at it. Maybe they wanted to provide a comment or something. They didn't need to learn. They had to learn that complexity to be able to participate. On the 3D Experience platform, we have the complexity off on the left where people need it. In the center, we have people who are consuming that model and that data. They don't necessarily need all that complexity. They need some simpler to use tools. Maybe they're project managers. Maybe they're that purchasing person that we were talking about when we were talking about bill of materials. They need to be able to have a lens that suits their abilities. And on the right side is where I live today, right? I want to get out my crayon and I want to mark something up on my screen because I'm on the manufacturing floor or I'm reviewing some design from a management perspective or legal perspective or stakeholder perspective. And I want to be able to participate by marking something up and getting that issue logged and getting it on that punch list. Well, all these people can participate in the 3D Experience platform. And that's what makes it so important for those startups. Arvind?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Peter. I thought next we would stress the importance of increasing the credibility with VC, but I think we have covered that quite in detail over the previous conversations we've had, both with you, Peter and Kevin. So let's just maybe fast forward a bit and talk about the importance of simulation today for the success of startups, right? We briefly mentioned modeling and simulation earlier in our discussion. I think this is a great time to bring about the importance and the relevance of an integrated environment for modeling and simulation for startups. Kevin, I'll start with you. Can you tell us what role in your angle, from what you see, what role does simulation play in a young product manufacturing company? Do you feel that companies are using simulation to their best advantage? Are there opportunities for them to use it more? So talk to us about that, Kevin.
So my simple answer is no, they're not. But now let me clarify that, right? You'll talk to some people in the industry, startups or otherwise, and they say, Kev, we've been simulating stuff for years and wind tunnels and all sorts of stuff. And they have. And many times before, you needed a supercomputer out the back with a 100 people IT department to run that supercomputer and write your own Monte Carlo simulations, blah, 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 to do whatever you wanted to do, right? It was hard. But again, the concepts of technology was there. To Peter's point, where we've had this, let's say, perfect storm is we see more compute capability, either in the cloud, on the desktop, out at the edge. We have better comms, we have better software, we have easier to use software. We have this concept of, I can start putting things together from different systems, so I get that one version of the truth. That helps break down those data silos. And the other thing with the whole, people talk, and we talk about the industrial metaverse and the 3D modeling. If you say, yeah, it's just it's a graphical representation, it's nice. And it's like, you're missing the point. It's about simulating. And what I mean by simulating is that, right, so we see a picture of a robot here. Can I simulate every single possible movement that this thing can do? What speed can it go on? What happens if I increase the speed by 5%? Is something going to break? What happens if my supply chain changes and I need to get a different piece of metal from a different country? What's the carbon footprint of that? Will its capabilities be the same? Is it more brittle? Will it break? Can I guarantee my 10 years warranty? Whatever, right? You can simulate all of that stuff today. Now, it's hard to keep up with all the advancements in this and the pace it's going, but to cut a long story short, you can do so much now in terms of simulation, not just in the design, but as you actually build it and feed that back into the design to make the next design better because you have IoT and real-time systems and to Peter's point, you might have the guys in accounting just trying to figure out, are we paying the right price for all the supply pieces for this, or is the product turning out to be more expensive? So you have that one version of the truth and the ability for us to be able to simulate. Well, what if this goes wrong? What if I turn up the production capability by 10%? Is something going to break? It depends on what you're trying to simulate, but we've never had such a low barrier to entry for folks to go off and try things in a digital world and simulate and iterate and do things much faster than in real time. Because before you had to go off and build it, figure out, no, that isn't right, we have to build it again. That costs time, money, effort. Simulation, we're just getting started in some ways. Now, that's no disrespect to people who have been simulating great stuff for years, but the amount of people that can use the simulation technology now, and again, back to Peter, imagine if everyone was doing this in their own silo, the complexity would blow your heads, right? So you've got to get it back into that one version of the truth in the cloud. You don't need your own IT department or a supercomputer outside the door in the shed. And if you're a startup with 3 or 4 people, you have access to this stuff today, right? It's mind blowing.
Thank you, Kevin. Low barrier to entry for simulation. So, Peter, does it ring true with 3D Experience platform? And maybe you can tell us how can the platform help to, I would say, popularize or even get access to simulation for people who thought that those simulations are for those big companies or the big boys, right? So talk to us about that.
Well, our 3D Experience on the cloud is the simplest, most flexible way to gain access to our modeling software and our simulation software, CATIA and Simulia respectively, right? CATIA needs no introduction, right? It's the world's leading solution for product design and experience. It's used by leading organizations all over the place to multiple industries, right? To design and experience the things that, the chair you're sitting in today, the car that you're going to drive to, home from work or wherever you are, the plane that you're going to fly from, everything. It's everywhere, right? Quite simply, you can draw and model anything with CATIA. Simulia also doesn't necessarily need an introduction. It delivers realistic simulation applications that enable users to experience the world we live in. That simulation that we're talking about, right? You evaluate and make sure what you've modeled will actually work. Together, on the same platform, on the cloud, they'll accelerate that process of creating and evaluating your product so that you can make sure that it has the performance you expect, the reliability that it needs, the safety, right? You don't want things to break or fall down or whatever it is, right? Before committing to making anything physical. Because remember, we were talking about being quick to market, right? No more time wasted building those interim prototypes. No more time wasted in these vast test protocols to make sure that I got the right material, that it's the right thickness, that I'm not making it heavier than it needs to be, or more costly than it needs to be. No more time wasted. Well, in the interest of time, you get the idea, right? No more time wasted is quicker to market. It's just exactly what Kevin, the venture capitalist, is looking to hear. He wants to be able to see us get to market fast.
Yeah, Kevin, Peter, thank you. That was an interesting discussion we had, and I'm sure we could have gone for another hour or so and talked about these very important points. So yeah, thank you. We discussed a lot of things, and I always like to get a simple one-liner takeaway from such a complex discussion we've had. So Kevin, I'll start with you. If there is just one thing a manufacturing entrepreneur can take away from our discussion today, what will that be?
I have two things. First, I'm actually not a VC. I'm playing the VC, and I've not nice VC friends, but I usually help companies navigate that kind of word. Anyway, like the thing, right? In all seriousness, what's the one takeaway? Look, I admire people in startups, big, small, whatever they're up to. It's an incredible undertaking, and the energy and the passion they bring. And they can get so caught up in getting the stuff out the door and, whatever, we'll worry about the systems and scaling it later and whatever. What I say to them always is, look, I know you're busy and it's getting harder to get financing, and there's always more work to do and not enough time. Time is the biggest thing. Just take a step back now and again and just step back and say, okay, hang on a second now. How are we doing things? What happens if so-and-so leaves? What happens if we need to collaborate with someone else? What happens if the next customer asks us, well, we use a different system than you used to. How do you plug into that? If the new customer asks us to make changes, do we have to go back and start like a 12-month physical development cycle, or can we simulate that quick? Just take a step back and see how resilient you are, because whatever's going to change in the next 12, 24 months, we're guaranteed there's going to be change of some shape or form. So how can you deal with that? So take a step back, no matter how good you're going, take a step back and go, okay, how would something like 3D experience, how could we get better at what we do and make more money by taking a step back and going there?
Taking a step back and evaluating how resilient you are. I mean, I think that's a good one-liner. Yeah, Peter, I'm very sure that 3D experience has some exciting things for startups. Startup leaders are wondering how can they compete with the big boys. I think this is your time to talk about that.
Thank you, Arvind. Absolutely. And just like Kevin, I'm not a startup guy. I'm not a founder. I'm somebody who talks to you about software on the internet. So I play a founder on TV, but here I am somebody who's bringing you the software. So let's think about this for a minute, right? This is the enterprise level software that is going to enhance your workflow, right? We've talked about the modeling. We talked about the simulation. We showed a slide about manufacturing and collaboration, even all the way out to marketing, to give you that nice glossy image that you want to be able to impress the venture capitalist with, or put your product on Amazon tonight. So, it's all there. It's on the cloud. It's available to everyone anywhere. That's the first thing. The second thing is this is going to give you the credibility with your investors, right? Investors know that this is the very same software that's being used by large companies to design the world around us. Again, the cars, the planes, from aerospace to transportation to industrial equipment to high tech, these industries are all turning to the 3D experience platform, and it's well used for decades. And then finally, we didn't get a chance to talk much about this, but the software is tailored to your budget. For the approximate cost that you're going to be putting together for all those point solutions that we talked about at the top of this call, we have some amazing promotions that start at very reasonable rates and feature up to 90% discounts on advanced solutions for startups that qualify, that meet some basic, simple requirements, which you do. And coupled with the low cost of that software as a service being available to you around the world on the cloud, you can focus your time and your money on your business and not on your software. So those are the three takeaways, Arvind, that I wanted to talk about.
Excellent, Peter. I again want to thank you and Kevin for this engaging discussion we had today. And also, on behalf of all the panelists today, a special thanks to people who logged in and have heard us talk about what makes a successful startup. Kevin and Peter, I think we have some time for doing some Q&A. So let's start with the first question, and that's to you, Kevin. Data is very vital, as one of the participants have said. So how must manufacturing startups think about data? And that's the question.
Well, it was Peter in his earlier was talking about, data. And to be quite honest, all of this does come down to the data. We used to chat before, we don't have enough data. Now we have loads of data, and we spoke about you have to simulate more, and you can make iterations and do it all in a digital format rather than doing it in the real world. But I suppose the biggest thing that I see a lot with companies when I'm working with them is that they say, "Oh, we've got all this data," and you go, "Great, how good is your data?" Because if you don't trust your own data, you can put it into whatever models, tools, AI you want, and you mightn't like the result. So the whole data is key. It is the primary building block for all of this, right? And we're getting more and more data from different entire life cycles, all coming into one version of the truth. But the ultimate thing is that I need to trust the data coming in as well, and watch for anything that goes weird, because again, that helps me simulate, iterate, pass the red face test. So data is key.
Thank you, Kevin. Peter, so how does 3D Experience approach data?
Well, there's some amazing things out there that we've all seen in our various experiences. And Kevin reminded me as he was giving this answer that back in the day when I was in practice in AEC, we shared drawings all the time, right? But now in today's world of data, it's not good enough to share those drawings, and we find that maybe a parapet winds up looking great in plan, but it's out on 2 feet out in space because it was just needed to look good in a drawing, right? So Kevin's point about making sure that your data is good is an incredibly good one. But there's another thing to think about here, right? Is your data is your company. It is your intelligent property, your IP, right? And you need to be able to know where that data came from. You need to be able to document the decisions that come into it that affect that data and generate that data. And God forbid something happens to one of your key people, or he gets a better job offer, or decides risk is not something he wants to do, and so he winds up disappearing. Now you've got to put a new person in place, and she's got to come up to speed, and she needs that context that the 3D Experience platform, through documenting the requirements, through documenting the conversations, to putting everybody on the same page, that context is all there. And then there's one last thing that when you mention data that everybody thinks about, right? Who's going to steal my data? Oh my gosh, the data's on the cloud. Who's going to steal that, right? We have to bring this answer in a relatively short period of time. There's a trust center. It has all the answers to your questions about security. It has all the answers about the certifications that we have in both in our data centers and our software to make sure that your data is secure, locked up tight, and accessible to only who you want it to be accessible to.
Excellent, Peter. Now, this question, Kevin, is for you. You know, we all know that today's products are not just pure mechanical products. There's a whole lot of electronics in them. There's a bunch of software in them. Think about a car like Tesla. I mean, would you call it a moving computer or just a mechanical car with four wheels and some kind of a drive? No, the reality is today's products have to have electronics and software. So how must startups approach this? And, you know, how should they approach the integration of software, electronics, other non-mechanical stuff into their products?
In the theory ideal world, you have to address all of it because, okay, you know, an autonomous vehicle is a pretty complex beast. Let's, what do you call it, bring it back a small bit in terms of, but I don't care what you're developing today, if it's some sort of there's going to be some electronics in it, PCB design, maybe you buy all that stuff off the shelf and just plug it together and you connect up a couple of motors and you get a robot to move that you sell to someone who in a garage or a factory or whatever. In the ideal world, when I say I want to simulate that product, I want to simulate all that product working in a 3D world. And whether that is like if you think of the robot, it's got electricity coming into it, it's got motors, it's got control circuitry, it's got software. It may have remote control software that I'm doing stuff from somewhere else, and it has to physically move. So the whole mechanics, the physics models and whatever, it can't do something that the laws of physics don't allow, right? Otherwise I'm back to, I just made some thing for the metaverse and can't work in the real world. So in the ideal world, yes. Now the feature is that you can get software today that does every piece of that, but they're all different. And this is back to Peter's point in terms of you need to start bringing them all back to one version of the truth, because you might have it working in every silo, but when you join them all together, you figure out, okay, you meant something different when you said that word. I heard the word, but I thought it was something else. And it's that transparency and breaking down the data silos. So can you do it? Yes. Is it instant? No. But that's what you got to start thinking about. It can't be in siloed anymore, regardless of where the teams are based, right? Because your customer is going to say, look, I want to say, and can we change this bit and change that bit? And what happens if you do change the PCB layout? Does that have any implications on anything else? That's where simulation comes in, rather than ordering it, getting it in, putting it in, go, oh God, it's a half a centimeter too big. Who knew, right? That's where the simulation comes in.
And Arvind, I know you didn't ask me that question. I'll go ahead and provide a little bit of an answer as well in there. We spent the time today talking about the basics, right? We talked about modeling, we talked about simulation. We mentioned that you could go all the way to advertising and, you know, bringing your product to market that way. But there are over 250 applications on the 3DEXPERIENCE platform. This is, again, enterprise level software. If you need to do something, the power of the cloud enables you to use that software and then put it back on the shelf and, you know, give it back to Dassault, basically, right? You're not buying an application for something you only need once in a while, right? You're going to use it on the cloud, then you're going to not use it, go back to the basics and make sure that you get where you need to be. I'm sure that we have it. If we don't have it, we have the ability to bring your data onto the cloud through our collaborative solutions. So lots of things to explore with the 3DEXPERIENCE platform. It's not only internal to Dassault, it's all your data. And you know, it's SAP, it's everywhere, right? So that's the kinds of things that we like to think about when we talk to startups.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you, Peter, for that. I think, Peter, this one is exactly for you. You mentioned enterprise level software, and our audience today are wondering, enterprise level software means Boeing, the Airbus, the Raytheons, right? I mean, that's what comes to the mind, the Fords, the General Motors. Now, as startups, they might be intimidated by enterprise level software. And that's exactly what our question is being posed. How easy is it to onboard your enterprise level software, and can startups do that?
That's a great point, Arvind, and absolutely something that I experienced coming from a more traditional CAD background, right? Oh my gosh, the learning curve is going to be so great. It's going to take me forever to learn this, blah, on and on and on. I want to recall our conversation that we had a little while ago about the levels of complexity, right? The way the platform is put together enables you to participate to your needs. Again, the person who's doing 3D modeling needs that complexity of that very capable application, whereas somebody who just wants to sketch on the screen, get their issue into the system and get it taken care of, that person doesn't need to know those tools. That's the first thing. The second point is yeah, when I came to Dassault Systems, I didn't know how to use CATIA. I'll go ahead and say something trite like, this is not your father's CATIA, right? Tons of UI specialists and UX specialists have been working on it to make it much more digestible, discoverable, and learnable. But what the cloud comes with is a personal online support and training, right? It's online training to master those skills that you need. It's 24/7 through our communities, through a direct community with Dassault Systems. It's a 24/7 support. And ultimately, we have the ability to support you through what you need to do. So yeah, you are picking up maybe some software that's not exactly familiar to you, but you are also in the final analysis picking up the software that you need to play with others, right? If you're going to enter into the transportation marketplace and all the big people around you and your suppliers, both up and downstream, they're all using this software, right? That's the thing. You need to be able to participate with them and share software with them. We got your back when it comes to learning it.
And if I can just add on to that, Peter, you also mentioned during the session in terms of you have different consumers, and in the world I grew up in, it's like people would say, but I need all of, like if you think simulating a physics model for this is easy, you're dreaming. We need hardcore engineering quality grade software, and you do, and you have it. But it's the other people who go, I just want to see what it looks like. And I don't need to know how it all works. And yet the interface, if you call it like that, is I can go in as a particular user and I don't have to reconfigure the entire bloody thing. I can just see it. Or as you say, I'm coming from the finance department. I just want to see whatever, I would like one version of the truth. So that ability, again, we've never had that capability before, because you can kind of have different user roles or different ways of exposing that data to people, all through the same one version of the truth. And I'll speak for my own age group, whatever we came, and you have to learn all this stuff. Look at our kids and teenagers. They're off playing Roblox and Fortnite and whatever. If they want to create their own games, they're off in graphical tools, creating all this stuff, getting spatial awareness, 3D models, physics, how it all works. So the next time you go hire your next engineer coming out of college, they'll probably have some of this core skills already, right? So we're the ones that have to catch up.
Indeed they do, and that's exactly what we do. But what we see a lot, you reminded me of something here, not so much the finance people, but the people on the manufacturing floor, right? The people on the manufacturing floor, they came up through manufacturing. They don't know how to use these CAD applications, yet they have some very valuable knowledge and lessons to impart, right? So the tools need to be easy to use for those folks to participate in the conversation, while the person who does need that complexity is able to get what she or he needs to do at the same time.
Very bad.
Yep. Oh, I was thinking we would go without talking sustainability, but I guess that's not going to happen. Yep. We have someone who's asked about sustainability. I think we'll start with you, Kevin. How important is sustainability for manufacturing startups? How should they be approaching the topic of sustainability?
To me, it's on the same level as the financial viability in terms of where am I getting my funding? How do I make money? How do I keep the lights on? Now, sustainability means many things to different people. And I mentioned earlier, to me, sustainability is a key part of how resilient you are. And when I say resilient, is that, well, can you deal with things that will change. But let's just say sustainability. It is becoming a must-have game stakes to say you need to know your scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions. Now there's lots of different methodologies out there, and we argue about this, that, and the other, but you have to understand what your own footprint is. And when you build a product and you go to give it to someone, they go, well, what's the embedded carbon, or what's your scope 1 or 2 or whatever of that product? So you need to know that. So you need to start plugging back into the supply chain. And that's not easy, right? You need enterprise quality tools to be able to do all that. If anything changes, we've seen, God forbid, with the tragic consequences of the Ukraine war, a lot of people's steel is now coming from somewhere else. So suddenly I need to plug that into my model to go, well, what's the sustainability costs for that? What are the costs on reliability, whatever? And the other thing with the simulation thing, and I see lots of examples of this, is that can I design things in a different way to make them more recyclable? Because if I can make it more recyclable, you start getting into here in Europe, we talk about the circular economy, and you see it in the US, and I can simulate all that rather than going off and making prototype after prototype after prototype and then figure out it's the wrong one. So again, I can share here's my design, potentially with a complete third party that's a recycler, and they'll say, well, that's going to be hard to recycle because our robot does this. Can you move, whatever, and that's how we start joining the dots. To me, that's sustainability. But if you're not thinking about it, then you could have a tough time.
Peter,
Yeah,
your thoughts?
Totally agree with that. Totally agree. And in an illustration on how sustainability means different things to different people, what I thought of immediately when you asked your question was a podcast I was listening to the other day. There was a company, they were changing the way that we fly in the world, right? That's their stated intention that they want to do. And they're building an amazing plane, and they're going to tell you all about it. It's a podcast out there. But what they also talked about was they wanted to be sustainable. They had to design it in from day one, right? So they found out that there's a specific type of jet fuel that can be made from the components of the atmosphere, right? The carbon that's in the atmosphere already, this, that, and the other thing. But none of the jet engines run on this jet fuel today. They were able to use the power of their tools to be able to develop a jet engine to go into that plane so that sustainable fuel was designed into their plans from day one. And their reception as what we're talking about from the investment community it's just one more thing for those folks to trust in them. We've got that technology on the 3D Experience platform. Check it out. Look at what we're able to do. Look at how we built sustainability in from day one in our design. It's designed in.
Yeah, so I guess the main point here is you need to keep sustainability not at the back of your mind and make it as the last thing that you want to put a check mark around, but right from the start, right from concept, everywhere you go, we need to be thinking about sustainability. And Kevin talked about the circular economy, and Peter gave an excellent example of a living startup right there who's embracing sustainability at every aspect of their product development. So those tools are out there. And I think if you, as a startup, if you fail to recognize the importance of sustainability, it will be too late by the time you start to get there due to either pressure from the investors or due to pressure from your competitors. It's really too late to be thinking about sustainability if you have not thought about it right from day one. I think that's the message that both Peter and Kevin wants to give.
Well, if I may, just I'm not sure if we mentioned it earlier, but it's like, can you imagine years ago, you design a product on paper, you'd build it, you'd figure out now they need to change that, you'd whatever. Just think of the amount of raw materials we used up in making all the prototypes that were out the back, right? You now do all this stuff on a computer, and fine, there's an environmental impact of the computers and the data center and the blah, but then you have renewable energy and REX and so that can, and again, you can answer that, you can pass the red face test and say, look, this is how we're thinking that. But the ability to be able to simulate all this stuff and plan it out and then just make it once and make it right once, like the sustainability impact of that alone compared to what we used to do 10, 20 years ago is, don't underestimate that either, right?
Gosh, I have visions of those Federal Express tubes that we used to ship drawings to each other, for review all the time, waiting for the 4 o'clock Federal Express guy. Oh my gosh. So yeah,
time to market.
Yep.
No, it's excellent, Peter. You mentioned that, there were times when we used to wait for products to come from, say, Far East, and that would take 3 days by express shipping, and it cost way more to ship than to make. Now we're talking about cost, we're talking about footprint, we're talking about, the time to market is just extended by 3 days. With 3D printing, suddenly those things changed. You could just print them right at your door. So, I mean, we're really talking about technologies out there that enable sustainable practices. So the idea is the startups have to embrace them right from day one and have to be thinking about not just designing their product, but how are they going to make it? How are they going to package it? Kevin, you made an excellent point. It's just not materials, but we are really talking about packaging. Design for sustainable packaging is really a big theme in a lot of industries. And finally, how are you going to dispose it? Is there a way to recycle your things? Can you reuse them? That's becoming a big movement across Europe. Can I reuse existing products and repackage them to become completely new products? And we see some excellent startups just using existing products and building some new things out of it. So, I mean, I think we can have an entire webinar or on sustainability, but, last comments, anyone, before we close?
I think we have 3 passionate people that are willing to go on and talk about this stuff all day long if you let us. That's what it is just fascinating stuff to have this conversation.
I agree. We think things are going quickly now, and it's hard to keep up with what everyone's doing and the art of the possible. Buckle up. We're just getting started.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Peter and Kevin. Thank you very much. I think we will end this Q&A session right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Arvind.
Thank you.